Anybody have like good news or a good part of their day they'd like to share while we welcome people in?
I got a job.
Oh, excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. I interviewed for a job today and they hired me on the spot.
That is fabulous news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Huge relief. Huge relief.
Okay, so I think we should begin, and I'll keep my eyes on the waiting room for any other folks who may be showing up a little bit late. Good evening. Welcome to the second event of Gettysburg College's fourth Peace and Justice Week. Woo-woo! The panel today is focused on community engagement. My name is Hakim Williams. I'm Associate Professor of Africana Studies, Director of the college's Peace and Justice Studies program, and I'm also involved in education, Civil War era studies, international and global studies, and public policy. I am so happy to introduce Gretchen Natter, who is Assistant Dean of College Life and Executive Director of one of my favorite places on campus, the Center for Public Service. I'm so glad that we are centering community today. When I was a young child growing up in Trinidad, I didn't grow up with much. I grew up in a community called Laventille, and they would always cheer me on, encouraging me to get my education and helping to fuel my dreams. And so I'm always grateful for that community that helped me to get to the place I am today. When I think of community, I often think of the African term Ubuntu, which means humanity. And if you can extrapolate from the term Ubuntu, it really means I am because we are. And I try to live by that credo. I am nothing in this world without my community, without my peoples. And I'm always trying to expand what my peoples means to me, yeah? And so you all gathered here today to learn and listen and engage in discussion. You're also part of my expanded circle of community. And so I'm going to hand it over to Gretchen Natter, who will then introduce the panelists, and we will get right into it. So again, welcome and thank you for showing up, and hopefully you have some wonderful questions for our panelists today. Thank you. Gretchen, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Professor Williams, and welcome to all of you. Just a quick note, we are recording tonight's session so that those unable to attend can access it later. And so that's just a word for you to know. So if you have your video on, please feel free to keep it on if you're comfortable doing so. If you're more comfortable leaving it off, that is a-okay. At any point during this, please participate. Please let us know what your questions are, what your comments are. I'll try to monitor chat while our panel members are sharing stories. But of course, we'll also have time for questions at the end. So again, while we have a lot of great stories to tell, and I'm so pleased to introduce you to some of the people that I want to be when I grow up. We want this to be, like Professor Williams said, a community experience. So with me today to help tell stories, I'm pleased to introduce two agency community partners. The first is Megan Shreve, and she is the Executive Director of South Central Community Action Programs here in Adams and Franklin County. She'll tell you a little bit more about her work in a little bit. Second, with us, another agency community partner is Jamie Gagliardi, who is a community health educator and advocate with the WellSpan Health. And so working largely with the Spanish-speaking community, but many others in Adams County, especially to think about community health, personal health, and how that is a community activity, really. Second, I'm pleased to introduce three student partners with us today, all who are Center for Public Service student leaders, and they have been involved in CPS and the campus community and the Gettysburg and Adams County community in a variety of ways. So with us, we have Katie Mercer, class of 2021, Melanie Pango, also class of 2021, and Nick Voon, who is class of 2022. So thanks to all 5 of you for being part of our discussion today. Real quick here, I'm going to share my screen so that we can just talk a little bit about what the Center for Public Service is. It's very easy, really, to kind of categorize us as, just another place where you can volunteer, right? It's something to do good for community, but I'd like to kind of challenge that notion a little bit and think a little bit more deeply about what role it is that we play in the local community and beyond. So first of all, a little introduction to our home here in Adams County. Gettysburg College is part of this South Central Pennsylvania community. It's quite rural, but we have close proximity to the state capitol in Harrisburg, as well as the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And I think with everything going on in our political world right now, that's important to note. That's important to kind of own and to kind of realize how the decisions and actions that are happening in those spaces affect the daily lives of those of us that live here in Adams County and other communities as well around the United States and the world. When you think about Adams County, a lot of our leading industries are focused around tourism. And the battlefield, though there are other ways that tourism are being encouraged here in the local community in terms of recreation, as well as like food and cider and wine tours in the local town. So that's a booming industry for us. But the other big industry is agriculture. And that's not just working in the orchards or working in the fields, though we are one of the largest producers of apples, especially here on the East Coast of the United States. But that also means food processing. So everything from packing plants that are packing the apples and the peaches and the plums and the apricots and so many other fresh produce, but also facilities that process that produce into things like applesauce or drinks or those kinds of things, but as well as processing plants for, say, turkey and chickens and other meat. Also a lot of egg production in our county as well. So those are some things to keep in mind about what impacts the kind of income that people can earn in our county and those kinds of things. Because of that, because of those drivers of industry, because also of our proximity to major metropolitan centers like Baltimore, like Washington, D.C., we have a demonstrated need for affordable housing, for accessible transportation, and for living wage positions. But a great thing about living here is we do have access to open spaces, right? It's easy to get to a space where you feel like you could breathe some fresh air. But at the same time, even though we have this great agricultural community around us that are doing so many things for and with the community, we still have as many as 40% of our county's children who are food insecure, meaning their families need to access some kind of food emergency system in order to make it through the month. But at the other part of that, the reason that I continue to stay here in Adams County and find the work so engaging is that there are so many folks here in the local community who will create solutions, kind of local solutions, kind of can do, let's get together, make them solutions through innovative partnerships. And that's what we're going to explore. All right, I'm going to keep going, but again, if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt. So that's where the Center for Public Service comes in. We are not the driver of the community, we are part of the community. And again, like I said, it would be easy to say to kind of measure our success by the number of students that are involved, the number of hours that they participate in local community and beyond. But really, our mission calls us to be actively engaged in the work of change. And when we think about change, we're not always only thinking about creating change for the other, right? Of course, we want to challenge the systems that create hunger and upend those so that no child is hungry, so that no elder is hungry. But we want to change ourselves. We want to be thinking about on an individual level, how that calls us to action, how that calls us to maybe change some of our practices. That calls us also as an institution to create change. Like, how is Gettysburg College making decisions that affect the local community? And so in that work, we really focus on 4 major issues with our partners. We feel like this is where the community has said, these are issues that we need to work together on, and where we felt we could have some actual impact, and working alongside those with more wisdom in the community around food justice, poverty, immigrant rights, and education, or kind of youth empowerment and education. And we don't think that the only way to do that is through volunteering, right? So through that direct action, that work, serving food, tutoring children, tutoring adults, working with the elderly, all of that is really important, but that doesn't necessarily create change or really challenge the system that we're part of, right? If we're going to seek justice, we kind of need to have a holistic version of action. And so we find that that change happens when we combine that good work, that good volunteering, with education, kind of helping people in the community understand why these issues exist. By backing that education with research, right? We have to understand the data so that we can make good decisions. We need to kind of unpack that data and that education through community dialogue, kind of understanding each other's experiences of that based on our own identities, based on our own experiences of those different issues. And then create coalitions of the unusual suspects, right? Bringing business, bringing young people, bringing older people, bringing agencies together to create solutions that actually create change for those people living in our community. And finally, we need to develop policy. And that's not just the governmental policy that we alluded to early. That, again, is the way that we make decisions personally, but the way that our institutions make decisions as well. And all of our work is done with the experience of the students along with our community partners at the center. So our students are really at the core of helping us plan and implement all of this work with our agency partners through their positions as program coordinators, through immersion project leaders. So when we can travel outside of the pandemic, they're part of making sure that that happens. As well as through summer fellowships and grant opportunities. And we'll talk about how to connect with those more toward the end of the session. All right, I'm going to stop the share here for now and invite some of our students. So for Katie, Melanie, and Nick, I would love for you to start telling us some stories. So how and why did you get involved here in Adams County, and what impact has it had? So Katie, could I ask you to get started with that? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yes, I'm Katie. I use she, her pronouns. Like Gretchen said, I am a senior this year, and I've been working for the Center for Public Service for 3 years now, but I've been engaged with them since I was a freshman. And I ended up getting involved in the local community first and primarily through my first year seminar, which was around homelessness in the local area and just homelessness in America in general. And part of that involved a service component. So I was able to engage in Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So I was allowed to see and partner up and mentor a student in the local area, as well as I was able to do an overnight at the cold weather shelter. And that, I think, is the one experience that sticks out the most to me, that brought me kind of molded me with the Center for Public Service and the Adams County community in general. I just met the most incredible people there. Everyone was so kind. And for me, I grew up in an area very similar to Adams County, rural, agricultural, and the strength of the community support network there is nothing like I experienced in Gettysburg. The people that I met in community organizations and services were all just so passionate, and I knew that's something that I wanted to do. So I really idolized the people who worked at Center for Public Service, and I remember meeting program coordinators. I remember meeting Gretchen and Jeff and just meeting community members that made me feel like the work that I could be doing would be really important. And that's something that I found to be the most impactful, is being able to hear the stories of clients and community members who have utilized services that we're able to help support and give student bodies to. Sometimes that's all that they really need, is just people to move things. And that doesn't seem like it has a huge impact, but it really does. And that's something that's kept me here, is just the community and the way that people are so engaged in supporting those around them. That's something that I haven't really found anywhere else. And it's so strange because it wouldn't seem like Gettysburg is any different than any other town, but it really is. The community here is so unique and is really, really focused around supporting and addressing issues that are hurting their fellow neighbor or are limiting someone's access to something. So I've been able to have experiences working as a program coordinator. And then I also started as a Heston Fellow in Gettysburg as well. So I've been in Gettysburg for a long time. I spent my freshman summer here. I did a project around food service and immigration. And then I continued my work with our local farmers market and was able to really work on things that were suited to not only my interests, but my academic profile as well. I'm a health sciences major, and I was able to do things around nutrition and was able to just expand the way that my community engagement and the things that I was learning outside of the classroom connected with the things that I was learning in the classroom. So it's all kind of become one giant blob of my Gettysburg experience. So I don't know what I would be doing with my life if I didn't find the Center for Public Service. And it's really also shaped the way that I'm going into my postgrad after this semester. I'm hoping to go to graduate school for like a public health related program, where I came into Gettysburg looking for pre-med, but a lot of the things that we do at the Center for Public Service is about the way that things of how many intersectional things affect the human experience. And when you're thinking about health, that's true as well. And that was something that I've been able to learn and has kind of formed my experience leaving Gettysburg as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Katie. Nick, can I call on you to share a story about why you got involved in the local community and what impact it has had on you?
Thank you, Gretchen. And Katie, that's so amazing that you've involved so much with CPS and your time at Gettysburg. Well, hello, everybody. Hello again. I'm Nick. I'm from Cambodia. I'm an international student, and I'm a junior. And I've been involved with CPS since my freshman year, just like Katie. I really didn't know much about CPS, but I went to one of their college, the club fairs in the fall semester, and then I really wanted to get to know more about CPS. And then I got involved actually through a fellowship to Namibia, and I was lucky enough to, get that fellowship and went on an amazing project to Namibia the summer after my freshman year. And to answer your question, Gretchen, I think the reason why I was interested in community service is because of actually where I'm from. In Cambodia, we had the genocides like pretty recently, about 40 years ago. So my family members, my parents, and a lot of my neighbors actually went through this horrific genocide. And growing up, hearing the stories from them and learning at school, I was angry because that's just unfair. And in a way, it also encouraged me to, get involved with community service and hopefully, be a part of a change. And I really do not want that to happen to anybody, not just in Cambodia, but around the world. And then when I came to Gettysburg, I didn't want to just be a student. I wanted to be an active member in the Gettysburg community. So I found CPS. And then after my fellowship to Namibia, the summer after my freshman year, I really wanted to continue being part of CPS. And then I applied to be a program coordinator. So I was hired to be a program coordinator for immersion projects in my sophomore year. And part of my job is to organize trips to different cities in the US, also other countries, to learn about social justice in those communities. And I work with other four. I work with the CPS staff and another program coordinator. And I also was able to lead an immersion project myself to Alabama. And that was so transformative because coming to the US, I wanted to learn about the civil rights movement, and so being able to go to Alabama, especially to Selma, Montgomery, where the movement started, was really, really such a surreal experience. I've never thought I've had that experience as an undergraduate student. So, and then in my junior year right now, of course, with the pandemic, we're not able to travel. So I was hired to do another program, which is I work at the Painted Turtle Farm. So if you're gonna be, if you volunteered with us before, thank you so much. And I'm very, very happy with this program in particular because I'm able to learn more about food justice in the Adams County, and also get to meet volunteers and share with them about our farm. So if you don't know, it's a community farm that is owned by Gettysburg College, and we work with the migrant families in the Adams County, and we love our volunteers. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to come to our farm. So yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks so much, Nick, for sharing a part of your story. Look forward to hearing more. And Mel, why don't you share a little bit about the impact of getting involved in the local community has had for you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie, and I apologize if you can't see my face right now. My camera is not working. So I have been working with CPS 3 years, but I have been engaged with CPS for 4 years. And different factors pull me to get involved. The first factor is that I am from Ecuador, and I moved to this country when I was 9 years old. With my family and my culture, we have been very community-centered. And that's how my grandparents raised me, to be very community engaged. So even though when I moved here when I was 9 years old, and I am raised in this country, I have always seek to belong to a community and be part of that community. Another factor is that during my first year, so I'm a DACA recipient, and during my first year, there was this situation going on with the government, that they were in the process of no longer sustaining DACA. And I remember that me and another student, to kind of cope with what we were dealing at that moment, we wanted to get our voices out, but also protecting our identities, because there is a risk factor in self-identifying. And some people are not comfortable and some people are, but through public service, especially through, I'm so sorry, Gretchen, what's it called? The articles that you guys have?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Katie.
I was going to say, I remember your article in Surge,
yeah.
Melanie.
Through Surge. Yeah, so through Surge, we were able to get our voices out and still be anonymous. And I remember that one person who used to work there before, her name is Kim. He mentioned about CPS working with migrant families and migrant children. So that was one of the biggest factors that really pulled me into becoming very involved with the community, because
being a DACA recipient on campus throughout my first years was it was a very hard and difficult time because there were not a lot of people who I could trust, or also it was kind of a taboo topic situation. But being able to be with the families and to be with the children through El Centro, which is the after school program for them, and through the Peninsula Farm for the migrant families, it was kind of like it helped me cope with my situation. And what I learned from the migrant families is that even though perhaps they have mixed status families, there is this factor of being resilient, right? Of being, despite being classified as a certain thing with their legal status, there's resiliences that they have in accepting that that's part of their life, but they cannot be defined by only that. They're human beings, they're complex. They have a array of emotions, and they carry their resiliences every single day of their lives through their actions of being humans, right? So being involved for me as a whole has contributed tremendously to my personal growth. And this is something that I always say. And I think Gretchen mentioned, we are not working for, we're working with, and we are part of this community. And that's what is really important for people to know, that at the end of the day, you are going to be extremely benefited, because to me, it changed my life to the point that right now, after graduation, I'm also looking to graduate school, and I really want to push for immigration and undocumentation to be taken as a serious study. And one of my goals is to keep working with communities who are similar to the migrant families from Adams County, because there's so many things that you learn from them. They are, I consider them as organic academics. They have their own expertise despite not having access to being in academia. There's knowledge that we can share, that is actively shared when you're in that space. So yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Melanie. And thanks, Katie, Nick, and Mel. I think what's powerful about when I hear your stories is, one is that there's a way to explore many kinds of interests and passions, right? And that those relationships that you build through your involvement in the Adams County community and beyond kind of really fuels that passion and that drive to kind of understand different kinds of knowledge. And it also highlights that this is a long-term process, right? That it's not just kind of like, oh, I'm going to go clean up one day, though that's a powerful start, that this work of community change and then the change that creates within each of us is a long-term thing. And so giving it time to evolve and to seek out those opportunities is really powerful. So thank you for highlighting that. I'm now going to turn to Jamie and Megan to talk a little bit about what they find powerful about this idea of partnership. Why, Jamie, do you partner with other organizations, including maybe the college, but if it's more natural to talk about other partnerships, we'd love to hear a little bit of your perspective of the impact of partnership here in Adams County.
Thank you. The short answer to that is because I would not be able to do all of the goals and objectives that I set for myself on my own. There's only one person in my department. Community health, we would think it's a lot of people, but at this moment, it's just me. And it is actually through the partnerships that the Gettysburg College supported that we learn about collective impact, which is a model in public health that evidence-based interventions that will help move some of the indicators that we try to achieve in public health or in social issues in general. And it's true. I mean, if you put it in practice, if you are trying to accomplish something in the long term just on your own, you will probably achieve a lot, but it is much more rewarding individually and then to work in a larger group, because then you can reach more people. And that is where I find that partnerships really, really help. The other thing is, because one of the skills that I have found is very helpful is learning to compromise in a world that is very divided, and where there is this tendency to let our ego take over the conversation or the ultimate goal. With partnerships that seek to alleviate or help in the well-being of larger groups of people, you learn to be a better listener. You bring the experiences and the expertise that you have acquired over the years. But in these partnerships, you learn those skills where you have to find a middle ground, and also to really center yourself about the long-term goal, because there will be moments where there will be frustration because you want quick results. I'm sorry, English is my second language, and if my daughter will be here, will be like, that's not how you say it, Mom. That's not the word. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, if you want to achieve goals in a very short period of time, you will get frustrated. And then with partnerships, you talk to colleagues, talk to people that may understand your point of view, and then work together, compromise, and then work on the long-term goal. And that's where you can actually leverage financial resources that are usually scarce, like there's not many. And then in rural communities, such as ours, there is this process of understanding the social norms of a community. If you come from a large urban setting where where you have been used to hanging out with people that think very much like you, which is fine. I mean, that's normal. But then when you work in a rural community, the ideas of partnerships allows you to maybe have people that may think differently start considering other ideas. You're not imposing your ideas that you learn from other places, but instead you're bringing a different perspective, because you're also part of that community. You have the social capital to get the word out about a different idea. But at the same time, you need to learn about the social norms and the culture of that place. And that's where I find collaborations have been very helpful. And I'm so grateful for the Center for Public Service, because I know that there is not a chance that we would have done some of the wonderful things for our families over the years.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for sharing your experience and kind of your wisdom about that. I appreciate you sharing that process. Megan, would you share a little bit about the impact that partnership has for you and your work with SCAP, and how the college maybe has been part of that story over the years?
So I've been working with the Center for Public Service since 1995, I believe. Back in the early days when we were all young. You guys are all young still, when I was young. And back then, it was not really the same model that we have today. So we had students who came in and they would paint walls for us, and they might rake mulch at We Care. They were projects that we did. And then over time, it's been interesting seeing how different how the model has changed and how much it has evolved and how life-changing it has been for, I certainly think for students. I know it's been life-changing for me and the families we serve. And in 2005, I had left SCAP for a little while, and then I came back. And was charged with ending poverty in Adams County, which is like, that's a big job. And so we looked around to try and find models that worked, and we found circles. I don't know if you guys know about support circles, but it's an initiative that really families self-select in, and they build a new future story and figure out what they want to do with their lives. And then we match them with typically middle-class volunteers. That program started in a joint venture between the Center for Public Service and SCAP. That program, that initiative that we knew really nothing about, we were kind of winging it. It was a bunch of us who were volunteers, a bunch of amazing students who came every week. And some of the students did childcare, and some Campus Kitchens was born at that time. So we're doing dinners. But a bunch of students sat in on these classes with families, where families were sharing their life experience. And that's gone on since then, but I will never forget that first set of families and the experiences they had with Gettysburg College students from the Center for Public Service. Those students who would come in and just so willing to listen to people whose voices had been stolen. Like, you know, when you live in poverty, people don't hear you frequently. And what we do a lot in circles is let people tell their own stories and share the experiences that are real, their truth. And sometimes, you know, we have to make rules frequently when we just invite community members in. We have to say you're a silent observer because, you know, someone starts talking about the crappy job they have, some middle-class person who might want to fix them will say, but if you just do this, well, we want their truth. And so we have to make rules to create that space. But I didn't have to do that with the students I was working with, because there was this amazing, inquisitive empathy that wanted to hear their experiences. And you know, I had families who didn't necessarily have the best relationship with Gettysburg College students because they didn't know them. There weren't a whole lot of opportunities to have shared experiences, but they became such good friends. And you know, the insightful questions they would ask the families that we were working with and how important they would make. I mean, Gettysburg College made the first opportunity with students and faculty to have families share their stories. I mean, that's something we do routinely now. You know, we've had families be on All Things Considered on NPR. We've had families share at the Capitol in Harrisburg. That started at Gettysburg College with a friendly group of students and professors who let families share their truth and then were engaged in that conversation. It enabled us as an organization to move from just doing micro level work, which is where we help individual families improve their lives, to doing macro level work informed by the experiences of the families that we serve. And the students that we worked with all along the kind of that journey have helped. You know, Devin Grote, who was working with us, who did the wage gap for us. She investigated what happened to someone as they moved out of poverty, you know, from being on cash assistance to having a $24 an hour job. That video has been used nationally. I mean, she took the time to create it. And what's amazing, Devin worked with us on Circles. And then I found her about, 7 years later. She was helping coordinate Circles in another county. Like, she had pulled that with her. And so it's been amazing to me to see that evolution, and then to be able to watch the students that invested in our families, invested in our community, and we were able to invest in their lives, take that and be able to use it in other communities to spread that work. So for me, that relationship, that start, changed everything. I mean, the first community forum we had on food insecurity is where the Gleaning Project was born. And, you know, this year, the Gleaning Project brought in 500,000 pounds of produce. 500,000, like, that's mind-blowing to me. Those things were born out of this relationship that we have. And I think that's the thing about partnerships. I mean, we could probably theoretically say that, I mean, SCAP does a lot of services. We could probably continue to meet micro level needs almost on our own. There's a couple programs outside of SCAP that we partner with, but you can't do macro level work that way. You just can't change communities by doing this in a silo. First, we don't have enough expertise, we don't have enough wisdom, we don't have enough influence. So the more we partner, the less we see folks as competition in this world. The more we see them as collaborators and partners, the more opportunity we have to fix broken systems, to create paths out of poverty, to create beneficial relationships, authentic relationships across race and class lines, so that we can start to be working together to improve a community. All of that comes from partnerships. It can't be done any other way. So I feel like I learned so much from the experiences that I've had working with the students and faculty that I worked with. Like, it's been life-changing to our organization, to me, and to the community we work in. So I'm really grateful, really grateful.
Thank you for that, Megan. I appreciate a lot of what I heard there, especially about this idea of approaching the work with inquisitive empathy, and then moving that work from micro to macro, and kind of the power of, to use some of Jamie's words, the collective impact that we have when we do that. I think too, the what we're experiencing right now with the pandemic has really impacted how we're all experiencing the world. I mean, I was kind of noting today the stressors and the stress that I was personally feeling, but knowing that that has impacted how we all experience the world, and how that has affected so many's access to the basics, not to mention, kind of the larger needs and the larger power of community. And so, Megan, I wondered if you could start us out talking a little bit about how you've seen the pandemic impact kind of what's going on in Adams County, kind of what needs have risen to the top, or how you've seen things really amplified by that.
Well, we all feel the stress, don't we? So whether we've seen things happen in waves. So I think there are pieces that are normalized across, all economic class and kind of all the people in our community. That sense of isolation that we have, the deep worry that we have that we will make someone else sick. Like, those are pretty universal. People don't seem to be as concerned about it. I'll make myself sick, but I don't want to make my grandma sick. I don't want to make my husband sick, or my mom sick. But what we've seen with the folks that we work with, and typically the folks that we work with either are under the poverty level or up to about twice the poverty level. So they're struggling to be self-sufficient. And that's really the greatest majority of people that we serve in Adams County. A lot of the numbers for people who are under the poverty level are about 8%, but it's about 24% of families and seniors who can't meet basic living expenses. That's the folks that we're working with. And this has really disproportionately affected them from a financial perspective. Adams County is a little bit different than most communities, and I work in Franklin County as well. So even when I compare these two that are only 26 miles apart, it's pretty drastic. 64% of our population leaves the county for work. So if you're going to make money, you're not going to be working in Adams County for the most part. You're going to be leaving the county for work. So the folks who live and work in Adams County predominantly work in the service hospitality industry or in agriculture. The service industry has been decimated by COVID. So we know that significant numbers of people are out of work. And even, down the line, so we're seeing people who are coming in we're seeing people who've never come in for assistance before, but we're seeing people like truck drivers who you wouldn't really necessarily imagine, but it's the downstream. So they might have been doing more taking food to restaurants. Well, none of that's happening. So it's been pretty broad, and we've seen it come in waves. So at first we were really struggling to get people food. So just trying to get enough food for folks. And on top of that, at the same time, we all remember it, it's when there was no toilet paper. So at the same time that was happening, most of the dry goods were also being purchased off the shelf. And so there were no donations of that to the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank. People weren't donating it to us, and we couldn't even purchase it from grocery stores. So we were having trouble sourcing food. We were having to think differently. We were working with restaurant suppliers who weren't selling as much, but they only had big containers. So it was just really crazy trying to figure out how you get food for twice the number of people that you were serving before. And that's come in waves. We saw that a lot in that kind of March, April, May timeframe. June was better. We saw it starting up again at the end of July and August. And then in July, the next thing that was really significant was people were falling behind on their rent. And so evictions were kind of on the edge. And that has just carried through. So from July through the end of December, that's been the biggest need. Well, it's going on, and large amounts of rent. So people who are $5,000 behind on their rent. So, they've not been working for a long time. The moratorium's been in existence. They've not been able to pay, maybe paying a little bit. So they've been really struggling. In Franklin County, we got the contract for doing rental assistance. We typically do $75,000 in rental assistance in a year, $75,000. But in Franklin County, we've done $800,000 of rental assistance in the last 6 months. So it's mind-blowing when you think about trying first to respond to that kind of need. That's 11 times what we would typically do in a year. We did it in 6 months. You're trying to respond. You have to set up systems and processes to be in place. And because the state, as its brilliance, puts unnecessary regulations on these things, we had to figure out how do you package multiple funding sources. So we had 7 funding sources that we're trying to put together to make a landlord whole. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't make the people who were applying for that help have to navigate 7 funding streams. So I had, our staff became those navigators, and they would, on the back end, look at all of the circumstances for the family and then package funding to be able to make the landlord whole and keep the family in their home. So that's been really complex. It's getting worse again. So that funding ended the end of December. And there were a lot of people who were left out of that just by the nature, again, of state funding. So we're anxiously awaiting what's going to happen with the stimulus dollars, because there's a fairly significant amount of rental assistance in that. What's complex for a small rural area, though, is any community that has over 200,000 people, so a county or a city that has more than 200,000 people, gets a direct entitlement from the feds. We are not that community, which means it will go through the state. Well, the state is still trying to figure out what department it will go through, who should fund it, and should they add extra regulations. So frustrating, because it will mean in the state of Pennsylvania, if you live in Bucks County, you have less regulations than if you live in Adams County. That's crazy. So those are the complexities of dealing with the state on those pieces. And what really concerns us is there is no capacity in the homeless system. So if someone is evicted, there is no shelter space, there is no affordable housing. And not only do we have someone who's already been struggling, but to have an eviction on your record means finding housing afterwards is going to be nearly impossible. So those complexities can be overwhelming. So.
To say the least. Thank you for putting such a fine point on what kind of like the pandemic impacts have had and what you've observed and experienced through the pandemic. Jamie, do you have things to add about what you've observed about the pandemic impacts in Adams County?
Well, I think what I'd like our audience to imagine is how we heal when we are with a cold or with an illness, and the layers of stress that the individual has to deal with as they are trying to heal. One of the advices that we give is rest and fluids. And rest, sometimes it's not very realistic for someone that works in agriculture or in the service and hospitality industries. Those were things before the pandemic that were happening, in addition to one of our major barriers for the immigrant community that I work with is access to healthcare. And part of it is because they may be undocumented and do not qualify for health insurance, or they are just not really familiar on how to navigate, or they're just super healthy and almost never get sick, or they delay. They just wait until it's really, really bad. So one of the issues with what has happened with COVID is, in the back of my mind, I already knew what the barriers were and how a crisis like this would look like for our community. And it's all of those layers of stress that would come with worrying about where to come up with the money for rent, worrying about the guidelines to prevent the spread were unrealistic for individuals that live in households with uncles, with aunts, with grandparents, with the babies, with the toddlers, with the preschoolers and the teenagers. All of those layers of stress, even for individuals who are very resilient, and that is what our immigrant community is, that will take a toll. And we can look at the data. We can see what the disparities are how they look like in the numbers that we're collecting with the COVID crisis. In our community, it continues to be access to healthcare to get testing. It's complex. If you don't have symptoms, you can't get a test. So my role is to try to navigate folks on how to get testing, how to get a primary care physician. But I know in the back of my mind that they are also dealing with what Megan explained on some of the challenges that are determining how healthy they're going to be, or how successfully or how well they're going to, be if they get COVID. The majority of the population that I work with would be very resilient and will try to, figure out some of the things related to their healthcare. But what was interesting to me is that because some of them work in the food processing industries or agriculture, or their employers were deemed essential, they needed a letter saying that they were COVID negative, that they could actually get back to work. And so trying to explain that asymptomatic people would still be contagion, will be spreading the virus. And they're like, but I'm not sick. So explaining some of the basics of the virus behavior was a challenge. But as time progressed last year, people became more aware. And because they were listening from family members back in their countries, and their healthcare systems are not they don't have the same capacity, they started to become more aware. The economic impact, especially for, immigrants also have businesses that are small businesses, and navigating the assistance. I swear, I went to business school and I read a lot of the materials that they needed to bring to the bank so that they can qualify for all of this. It was very complex. So a lot of the health literacy, financial literacy, even for entrepreneurs, was difficult, and that illustrates that some of the programs, although were well intended, had barriers that did not take into consideration the nature and the realities of the folks that were getting this help. The last thing I wanted to say is that because immigrants did not qualify for some of the monies that were supposed to be helping households, that has created an impact in our community where there are families that they have mixed immigration status, where the children are citizens, where maybe one family member is a citizen, but the other one has a work visa or is undocumented, that they wouldn't qualify, and trying to navigate that, it's complex. Those are additional layers that will play a role in how people can overcome some of those side effects of, if they get COVID or, rest and fluids. It's not the same for everyone. That doesn't illustrate the reality of some of our families.
And trying to find places to quarantine folks. So some of our Latino families, some of our homeless population, both, we were trying to find places for them to quarantine, because if you're in a mixed generation family, we need you to quarantine so we can keep them safe. And if you're homeless, you have no place to quarantine, we can't put you in a shelter. Finding a hotel who will, even though the hotel is completely empty, finding a hotel that will take someone who's COVID positive, even though they're not having health issues that would mean they would need to be hospitalized, has been really difficult. So it's things that you just don't anticipate happening that we've all had to navigate. Or employers who have somebody who's tested positive, and so the exposure was like yesterday, and so they'll send their staff to get a COVID test. Well, it's too soon to have a COVID test, but they get a negative response, so they keep them working, which just spreads the virus. There's so many layers that we've all been, crazy times.
Thank you, both of you, for kind of sharing kind of the impacts that maybe we've been shielded from. And so thank you for, again, putting so fine a point and such a clear picture to it. And especially, we hear about national news stories. I think it's powerful to hear how it's happening right here with our neighbors, with the folks that we rely on, that we work with on a daily basis. So thank you. We're getting close to the end of our time, so I wondered if we could go back to Katie, Mel, and Nick, and talk a little bit about how can your peers get involved? How can they get information? Nick, could you start us, please? And then we'll begin wrapping up.
Thank you, Gretchen. There's so many ways that you can get involved with CPS. And right now we have, as I mentioned before, I work at the Painted Turtle Farm. So there are definitely a lot of need at our farm this upcoming spring. So we'll definitely need more volunteers at the farm. And if you don't know, it's very close to campus. It's like 5 minutes walk from where you live. So it's very convenient, and you get the opportunity to, with the pandemic, it's a little challenging. You don't, necessarily meet the migrant families in the Adams County, but you get to learn more about food justice, and also learn more about plants and agriculture, which I had to learn as well last semester. It was very interesting. And I'm sure as well, there's fundings that you can apply for. I think it's a grant that you can apply for if you have, ideas for community service, issues related to social justice. There's a grant that you can apply for through CPS. I don't know if CPS has emailed this to the entire school, but it's a great opportunity for you to put your ideas into actions. And this is for the summer of 2021. I think it's open for everybody. Mm-hmm. I highly recommend it to check that out. And the deadline is February 1st, if I remember correctly. So you still got time, highly recommend you to check that out as well. See if there's anything else I think
one fun thing, a way that you can get involved, is when you come back to campus, your testing site you will enter the testing site in Plank Gym right outside the Center for Public Service office. And so we're going to have information there for you so that you can get engaged. We're going to highlight some different programs in different ways. And you can always email us at just cps@gettysburg.edu, and we'll get in touch with you in the ways that you want to get involved. Okay. So lots of different ways. We'll also be updating our website. Thank you, Professor Williams, for putting that in. We'll also send you our website, which will be updating. Right now, there's a freeze on editing, so we can't put the latest information, but gettysburg.edu/CPS will get you to our website. And again, we'll have updated program information there. We'll put out information of ways that you can engage with SCAP and with community health, as well as other issues. But again, just understand that we're trying to do it in a way that's safe for all of us until we have the vaccine more widespread in our community and on our campus. But I think what I want to highlight is the power of community. the power of engaging with community over the long term. You know, some of the words, like I said earlier, that I heard is kind of engaging in this idea of collective impact, about how the power of what you do individually wraps up with the power of what others are doing, to kind of understand how your work is part of a larger picture, that you're meeting the needs that the community has identified, not what you have done, not what you think the problem is, but actively listening, having that inquisitive empathy, to really make sure that your energy is going toward places that are going to create the most impact, and to do it in such a way that, yes, we're helping people, but we also had that long-term change in mind. I don't necessarily want, you know, if I have grandchildren, I don't want my grandchildren to have the opportunity to serve in a soup kitchen. I'd rather their peers not need to access a soup kitchen. So those are the kinds of changes that we want to enact. And so I invite you into that work. And so thank you all for attending tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Williams to talk a little bit more about the context of this week and other opportunities to be involved.
Thank you so much. We do have maybe about 10 minutes left in this session. I'm wondering if any students may have any questions for Gretchen or any of the panelists. Is that okay, Gretchen, if we do that now?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so just feel free to unmute yourself or to put your question in chat. Yeah, let's open the floor.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to or go ahead with the chat, but I guess my question is, you know, similar like Katie Mercer and Melanie, I'm a 21 grad. So going into a post-grad world where finding that community might be a little bit harder, but I'm wondering, are there opportunities for recent graduates or alumni to stay involved? Because CPS is something I've been able to touch and go with, but not fully engage, but definitely, you know, going to be a young alumni, it's something I'd like to stay in touch with and even be engaged with in the future.
Yeah. Katie, do you have ideas that you want to share? Or do you want me to field that one?
You can go ahead, Gretchen.
Okay, all right. So I'm actually really glad you asked that question, Jesse, because we're working with a group of young alumni right now to stay engaged with CPS and our current students in more meaningful ways for an exchange of ideas, for connecting with local communities wherever you might move. And I think one thing that the pandemic has taught us is more about virtual kind of like from afar engagement, right? And so while we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, we'll be happy to share that information with our alumni. We'll work with alumni relations and also folks who we know have been involved with CPS like yourself to reach out to you over time to engage in that work. So that's not the most solid of answers, but know that it's something that we have been working on over the last couple of months to think about. In the chat, Sophia had asked if there are ways to help out from off campus or at home because of the pandemic. And yes, there are. We've started with our partners at El Centro and Big Brothers Big Sisters an online tutoring program called Guide. And so to meet with elementary age children to help them with their homework and engage in other kind of educational or just kind of fun activities. There's also, we're looking at putting our English as a second language classes that we're involved with in an online format. There are also, as well, there's the college prep program working with immigrant youth to engage them in the work to prepare for their applications for college or, you know, seeking out different kinds of experiences. So those all meet weekly. And again, we'll be putting out information as it becomes available and we figure out how the timing of the semester is going to work with what our community partner needs are. There are ongoing opportunities in town as well. For example, we've developed safe ways to work at Painted Turtle Farm. You know, the food pantry, other places also have ongoing need. And so we'll be connecting folks as it's safe to connect with those initiatives in town. We will be running small shifts, very small shifts at the campus kitchen throughout the semester as well. Okay, so yes, definite ways that we can be involved.
Those are great questions. Any others? So while you might be summoning the courage to ask a question, I will just advertise the next event for tomorrow. So on Monday, we heard a rousing call to students to become more politically active. Today, we heard about community engagement. So tomorrow is going to be a chance. It's a workshop. You're going to get an opportunity to learn about tools to become politically involved and to engage more in community. And we have two awesome people joining us tomorrow to lead this workshop. We have the Deputy Executive Director of Women's March. She was one of the leaders, original leaders who helped to create this historic movement here in the United States. She will be helping to run it tomorrow, Tabitha St. Bernard Jacobs, and also Luis Hernandez, who is co-founder and executive director of Youth Over Guns. Both of them will be leading the workshop tomorrow. Online, it says it's sold out, but it's not. We have made sure to reopen it, so you can go on and register. I'll put the link here for you. So there it is. So please go on and sign up. You don't want to miss this. And then on Thursday, so tomorrow that workshop is from 2 to 3:30 p.m. And then on Thursday during the same time slot, 6 to 7:15, we have some Gettysburg College alumni who are all peace and justice studies minors. They're returning to tell you what are the wonderful careers that they're in, how did peace and justice lead to that, and any internship opportunities for you. So you don't want to miss that either. So make sure and sign up for that. I want to thank Gretchen and these amazing panelists today for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your time. We know that you are all immensely busy, but I'm sure the students, I certainly do appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge, your expertise with our students. And I'm hoping you students will become absolutely involved in the community here, because it's just not enough for us to come to Gettysburg, spend your 4 years, study and move on. Right? What we do here absolutely impacts the community, and it can be a mutually beneficial relationship. So please absolutely get involved in the community here. We have about 5 minutes left. Are there any last remaining questions you may have for the panelists? All right, well, hearing none, continue to stay safe. Take care of your family members and those in society that we have forgotten about. Much love to you all. Thank you again to the panelists, and we'll see you all soon.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.